Good morning, friends. Here we are again, another snowy Sunday. And as you guys know, I'm not a big fan of snow. I don't mind the cold, although it's pretty cold. I just don't like the snow. And this is why. Let it snow all at once on Mondays and Tuesdays. On Sundays, I want to come to church, but obviously it's not going to work out this week. So thankfully you join us online. It's not the same, we know that, but at least it's something that we can do. A couple of quick reminders before we even get into the message today. Next Sunday, February 1st, we've got Ty Buckingham coming with us. And Ty is a fantastic evangelist, an Assembly of God evangelist, and we'll be talking about freedom. That'll be the theme. It'll be Freedom Sunday. I thought it was a great tie into the prayer and fasting that we've done. And so make sure to do that. And then also next Sunday, our small groups kick off. And so you can sign up for that that way. Now, I know a lot of our gifts and donations come in online. And so actually we're about 50% comes in online. But for those of you that don't normally give via online, you can always mail a check to the church, would be fine. Or stop by, work here all week. Well, probably won't be here on Monday. But if you want to give online for your weekly tithes and offering, it's at calvarylighthouse.org/give. give. And so I encourage you to do that. Obviously, it's always a blessing when people are generous. And our church has continued to be generous. I want to say thank you for everyone that gave last week to help with the missions trip for Calvary Academy. It's great and a wonderful blessing. So, all right, let's go ahead and jump into the message today. So last week, we talked about the barriers that insecurity sets up between us and God. In this week, I know we were supposed to have a guest speaker, Justin Bechtel. We're going to reschedule him because we kind of anticipated that the snow was going to hit and we weren't going to be able to meet. And I wanted everyone to see him in person. It's a wonderful opportunity. So, I'm going to share the message today, and then Justin will come and share with us. I think we've got him scheduled the first Sunday of March. But last week we talked about the barriers that insecurity sets up. And so this week I wanted to talk about a companion that goes along with insecurity, which is fear. You could almost say they're the two sides of the same coin, but fear affects us in some different ways. And so that's what I wanted to hit today, so we can build off of what we talked about last week, and then talk about how we as believers should live when we're faced with fear in our own life. So picture this. You're hiding, not because you want to, but because you have to. Your heart's racing, your hands are shaking, and every sound you hear makes you jump. Sounds like a setup for a Freddy Krueger movie or something. But you're doing what needs to be done, providing for your family, but doing it in the most unlikely place because you're terrified of what might happen if you're discovered. And this is exactly where we find our main figure for our sermon today, Gideon, in Judges chapter 6. He's not standing on a mountaintop declaring victory. He's hiding in a wine press, threshing wheat, trying to keep his family alive while living in constant fear of the Midianites who have oppressed Israel for 7 years. In case you didn't know, you don't thresh wheat in a wine press. You need wind to separate the wheat and the chaff. But he was hiding because if the Midianites found him, they'd take what it was. And that's what the Midianites had been doing for 7 years. They said that they had been coming like locusts on the land. And it's in this moment where Gideon is hiding in his place of fear that God shows up and calls him a mighty warrior. And I wonder if Gideon laughed. I wonder if Gideon thought God had the wrong guy. Because there's one thing Gideon knew about himself, and it was that he was afraid. And he certainly didn't feel like a mighty warrior. The Midianites had reduced him to hiding in a hole in the ground. And now God was calling him to lead an army against them. But here's what I want us to see today. God didn't wait for Gideon to become fearless before he used him. God met him in his fear and invited him into something that would require total dependence on him. And so here's the truth that I want us to remember today. The goal, while it would be wonderful to be fearless, the goal isn't to be fearless, because the reality is we're human. We're going to have struggles and challenges. Now, even though the Bible repeatedly tells us, do not fear, there's also places that says, in your fear, right, come to God. The goal is total dependence on Jesus, because fear is real and God meets us in it. Judges chapter 6:1 tells us that the Israelites did evil in God's sight, and he delivered them into Midian's hand for 7 years. And for that 7 years, the Midianites terrorized Israel. They'd wait until Israel planted their crops, and then they'd swoop in and destroy everything. 7 years of watching your kids go hungry. 7 years of living in fear. And that's where we find Gideon, threshing wheat in a wine press. He's afraid that the Midianites will see him doing what he's doing and take what he has. That's why he's hiding. And can we be honest for a minute? Fear is very real. Some of us are living with fear right now. Maybe it's fear about your finances, your health, your future, your marriage, your children. Maybe it's fear about things you can't even name. Just a constant anxiety that sits in your chest and won't go away. And if we're really honest, sometimes even come to church makes us feel like we're afraid. Even though we shouldn't have those fears. We think, what's wrong with me? Why am I still afraid? If I trusted God, wouldn't I be fearless? But here's the thing we need to hear. Fear is a human emotion that God created. Experiencing fear doesn't mean you lack faith. God meets Gideon right in the middle of his fear. If you look at verse 12 in chapter 6, it says, "And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, 'The Lord is with you, mighty man of valor.'" God didn't wait for Gideon to get his act together. God showed up in that winepress. And in that place of hiding, in the place of fear, he speaks to Gideon about who he will become, not about who he is currently. Psalm 53 or 56:3 reminds us something. It says, "When I am afraid, I will put my trust in you." Notice that it doesn't say if I'm afraid. It says when I'm afraid. The Bible acknowledges that fear is part of our human experience. David wrote in Psalm 34:4, "I sought the Lord and he heard me and delivered me from all my fears." David had fears, multiple fears, but he sought God and the Lord delivered him. See, the goal isn't to be free of fear, although that would be wonderful. The goal is to know where to take it. And this is the thing that Gideon learned and we need to learn, is that God calls us to dependence, not self-sufficiency. Gideon's response to God's call is perfect. He basically said, God, I think you got the wrong guy. If the Lord is with us, why is all this happening? Where are the miracles? The Lord has forsaken us. How often do we hear that in the Old Testament, right? Then in verse 14, it says, "Go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you?" But Gideon protests, right? We see that time and time again. Last week we mentioned Moses. But this week, Gideon says, "Oh, my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest, and Manasseh. I am the least in my father's house." Gideon's listing all the reasons that he can't do it. He's from the weakest tribe. He's the youngest in the family. He has no military experience, no credentials, nothing that would qualify him. And that's exactly why God chose him. Because God isn't looking for people who are self-sufficient. He's looking for people who know that they need him. God's response in verse 16 says this, "Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man." God didn't say, "You're right, go get some credentials first." No, God says, "I will be with you." It's the only qualification that God needs. So if you look forward to Judges chapter 6, Gideon sends out a call and 32,000 men show up. That's a pretty good army, but God says in verse 2 that you get too many people with you. There's too many people. And I think going into battle, I don't know that you can have too many people. But God said that you need fewer people. Otherwise, you're going to think that you did it yourself. That you did it in your own strength. And so they're facing an army compared to locusts with camels, the Bible says, without number as the sands by the seashore. So the odds are already overwhelming, and God says your army is too big. So God has Gideon send home everyone who's afraid. And of that 32,000, 22,000 men leave. Now they're down to 10,000. I would probably have an increase in fear at this point. He says there's still too many. So through another test, God reduces the army to just 300 men. Then God gives them a battle plan. No sword, no spear. Instead, take trumpets and torches hidden in clay jars and use your voice. It's absurd from a military standpoint, but here's what it is. It's absurd from a military standpoint, but it's going to require total dependence on God. You know, the truth is that sometimes God reduces our resources so that we'll increase our reliance on him. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 12, chapter 12, verses 9 and 10, it says, "My grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. For when I am weak, then I am strong." So in God's economy, 300 men plus God's presence is greater than 32,000 men trusting in their own strength. Some of us really are in a season right now where God's reducing our resources. Maybe he's allowing your savings to be depleted. Maybe your relationship's falling apart. Maybe your health is suffering. And you're thinking, God, I don't have enough. I need more resources, not fewer. But what if what God is doing is what he did with Gideon? What if he's reducing your army so you'll stop trusting in your own strength and start trusting in his presence? Because faith isn't the absence of fear. You've probably heard this before. It's obedience in spite of it. So here's Gideon with his 300 men, surrounded by an army that outnumbers him astronomically. I mean, it was truly another David and Goliath kind of scenario. And God says, Judges chapter 7, verse 9, arise, go down to the camp, for I have delivered it into your hands. But then God adds in verse 10, but if you are afraid, go down. Go down to the camp with Purah your servant, and you shall hear what they say, and afterwards your hand will be strengthened. So God acknowledges that Gideon might still be afraid. Even after everything, even right before the promised victory, God doesn't rebuke him for it. Instead, God gives him an option to strengthen his faith. So Gideon sneaks down to the camp and overhears a Midianite soldier telling about a dream where a loaf of barley bread tumbles into camp and knocks down a tent. His friend interprets it. This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon. Into his hand, God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. So the thing that they're afraid of, that enemy, they know that God's already given Gideon the victory. So in verse 15, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he worshiped. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. And at Gideon's signal, all 300 men blew their trumpets, breaking their jar to reveal the torches that they had, and shout, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. The Midianites, they panicked. They turned on each other, and they fled. And Israel won without swinging a single sword. Listen, faith isn't the absence of fear. It's obedience in spite of it. Gideon was still afraid. God acknowledged it. But Gideon obeyed anyways. And in his obedience, he discovered that God was faithful. Perfect love. God's perfect love for us. It gives us the courage to act even when fear is present. It doesn't mean what it means is fear doesn't have the final word. It means that fear doesn't control our decisions. It means we can acknowledge the fear, bring it to God, and then obey anyways. Maybe you're afraid of what people will think, but you can share your faith anyways. Maybe you're afraid of financial insecurity, but you obey God's prompting to give generously. You're afraid of failure, but you step into the calling that God has placed on your heart. You're afraid of being vulnerable, but you open up in a biblical community. Fear might be present, but it's not in charge. Jesus is. So that's where we got to recognize that's where we're at. Maybe where are you at today? Right? That's a good question. Where are you at today? Maybe you're like Gideon in the winepress, hiding, afraid, and wondering if God even sees you. Let me tell you this. He sees you. He knows your fear. And he's not waiting for you to become fearless before he invites you into his purpose. Maybe God is asking you to let go of your self-sufficiency and to trust him instead. If fear feels terrifying, let go of what you can't control. Give it over to God. See, keep in mind what Gideon faced. 300 men plus God is greater than 32,000 men minus God. Always. Maybe you're standing on the edge of obedience. God has made his call clear, but you're still afraid. Here's what I want you to know. You don't need more faith to obey. You just need to obey. See, faith grows through obedience, not before it. So take the next step. Even if your hands are shaking, God will meet you there. The call today is to dependence. Total, complete, radical dependence on Jesus. Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6, it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your path. The God who met Gideon in the winepress is the same God who will meet you today in whatever fear you're facing. See, the God who reduced Gideon's army to prove his power and faithfulness is the same God who sometimes strips away what we're dependent on, so we'll depend on him instead. The God who gave Gideon victory against impossible odds is the same God who promised to be with you wherever you go. Joshua 1:9 says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened. Do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. The goal isn't pretending like fear doesn't exist. The goal is total dependence on Jesus. And when we're dependent on Jesus, we have everything we need. So let me encourage you. Insecurity can keep us from God. Fear can keep us from God. And the answer to both of them is full dependence on Jesus and trusting and having the courage to trust in who he is. Let me pray. Father, we thank you so much. I pray you bless us. Bless us with your presence. Bless us with total dependence on you. I pray that we would come to you with all our needs, in our fear, in our insecurities, in our weaknesses, so that you can be strong in all aspects of our life. I pray you bless your people today. In your precious name. Amen. Hey, just another reminder, join us next week. Freedom Sunday with Ty Buckingham. It's going to be great. Invite a friend that maybe they're struggling with some aspect of their faith. I would encourage you to invite them, bring them. And then again, don't forget to give online if you like, calvarylighthouse.org/give. I pray you're blessed. I pray that you enjoy the snow. I don't particularly enjoy snow. Shoveling is no fun, but stay safe, stay warm. God bless. We'll see you next week.